You have been staring at that Clematis vine for 2 years now, and it has barely moved. Maybe a handful of flowers last spring. Maybe a few promising shoots in April that just stopped. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you started wondering if you have a black thumb. Stop right there. Stop blaming yourself, because here is something almost nobody has told you: your Clematis can grow 2.5 times faster than what you are looking at right now. There is a system of 7 hidden tricks that serious vine growers have been quietly using for years, and I am going to give you every single one of them today, in order starting with the smallest and building to the one that changes everything. I need to warn you about trick number 5 before we even get there. When I first heard it, I thought it was a mistake. It is not. It is going to sound like the exact opposite of what you should do to a young vine, and I promise you by the time I explain it, you will understand exactly why it works. Before we go any further, drop your USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now. It takes 5 seconds, and it tells me exactly where this community is gardening, so I can keep this content specific to your real conditions. Let's get into it. Trick 7. Correcting soil pH with garden lime. Most people assume that any flowering vine wants acidic soil the same way azaleas or rhododendrons do. That assumption is quietly starving your Clematis. Clematis actually prefers neutral to slightly alkaline soil, somewhere in the range of pH 6.5 to 7.5. In acidic soil, which is extremely common in gardens near pine trees in regions with heavy rainfall, or in beds that have been mulched with pine bark for years, the roots physically cannot access the calcium and nutrients they need, even if the soil looks rich and dark. Here is the fix. Once a year in early spring, work a light dusting of garden lime, specifically dolomitic lime, into the top few inches of soil around the base of the plant. Do not overdo it. A small handful worked into the soil surface in a ring around the crown is enough for most home gardens. If you want to be precise, a cheap soil pH test kit from any garden center will tell you exactly where you are starting from. Varieties that respond especially well once pH is corrected include Jackmanii, the classic deep purple hardy in zones 4 through 9, and Comtesse de Bouchot, a soft mauve-pink large-flowered variety, also zones 4 through 9. Both are notorious for looking stuck for years in acidic soil, and then taking off within a single season once the pH is corrected. This one change alone can unlock nutrients that have been sitting in your soil the entire time, completely inaccessible to the plant. Now here's the thing. Correcting the soil chemistry only matters if the roots have the infrastructure to actually use it. And that brings us to something almost no home gardener has ever heard of. Trick 6. Inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi at planting time. This is the trick professional nurseries use and almost never mentioned to home gardeners, because it is a one-time, low-cost step that happens the moment you plant, and once that window closes, you cannot really go back and add it in the same way. Mycorrhizal fungi form a symbiotic relationship with plant roots. The fungal threads extend far beyond what the plant's own root hairs could ever reach, dramatically increasing the surface area available for absorbing water and nutrients. Think of it as the plant renting an entire second root system for a fraction of the metabolic cost. The application is simple. When you are placing the root ball into the planting hole, sprinkle a small amount of mycorrhizal inoculant powder, widely available at garden centers, often sold specifically for transplanting directly onto the roots, so it makes contact with the root surface before you backfill. That direct contact is essential. Sprinkling it on top of the soil afterward does almost nothing. This is particularly powerful for large flowered hybrids with high energy demands like Nellie Moser pale mauve pink with a deeper pink center bar, zones 4 through 9, and Henriette, a large pure white variety, also zones 4 through zo. Both are heavy feeders in their establishment years, and an expanded root network means they are pulling in resources from a far wider area than an uninoculated plant ever could. Once the roots are set up to absorb everything the soil has to offer, the next question becomes, what do you do with all that new growth once it appears? And this next one is where most gardeners get genuinely nervous. Trick 5. Pinching the lead shoot in year 1. This is the one I warned you about at the top of the video. And I want to be honest with you, the first time someone told me to do this, I thought they had it backwards. When your new Clematis puts out its first strong shoot climbing steadily up toward the trellis roughly 12 to 18 inches tall, every instinct in your body will tell you to leave it alone and let it climb. Do not pinch off the growing tip. I know exactly how that sounds. You are looking at the one piece of visible progress this plant has made, and I am telling you to cut it off. Here is why that is precisely the right move. A young clematis left alone will pour almost all of its energy into that single lead shoot racing upward toward the light. What you end up with season after season is one or two thin wiry stems reaching the top of the trellis with almost nothing filling in below. When you pinch that lead shoot, you remove what is called apical dominance, the chemical signal from the growing tip that suppresses side buds. The moment that signal is gone, dormant buds lower down on the stem and at the base of the plant wake up and start producing new shoots of their own. One pinch at the right height can turn a single climbing stem into 4, 5, sometimes 6 independent shoots by the end of the season. That is not a small cosmetic difference. That is the difference between a spindly vine with flowers only at the very top and a dense full plant covered in blooms from the base of the trellis all the way up. Do this once early in the first growing season only. Pinch each new lead shoot back to just above a healthy leaf node when it reaches that 12 to 18 inch mark. This works across every pruning group, but it matters most for vigorous, large-flowered types like Roguchi, a nodding violet-blue bell-shaped bloomer zones 4 through 9, which left unpinched will happily climb 8 feet on one bare stem and forget to branch at all. Yes, you will delay how high the vine reaches by a few weeks. What you get in exchange is a plant with a completely different shape for the rest of its life. Now, once you have all these new shoots branching out in every direction they need, somewhere organized to go otherwise, you just end up with a tangled mess instead of a full deliberate display. That's trick number 4. Let me ask you something honestly. Where else are you getting information like this? Think about that for a second, because the person at your local garden center is not going to walk you through why pinching a healthy shoot on a 2-month-old plant is the correct move. That is not the kind of conversation that sells more plants. This channel exists to give real American gardeners the specific, honest information the industry has no reason to hand you for free. If this is helping you, hit subscribe right now, and think of one person in your life with a clematis that has been sitting there thin and unimpressive for years. Send them this video today. Alright, 4 tricks left, and they only get more important from here. Trick 4: Fan training on the trellis. Here is a mistake almost every gardener makes. Without realizing it, they plant the clematis pointed at the trellis and let it figure out the rest on its own. Left to its own devices, a clematis will find the shortest, straightest path upward, which almost always means it climbs in one narrow vertical column, leaving both sides of the trellis completely bare. The fix is called fan training, and it takes about 10 minutes at the start of each growing season. As new shoots emerge, especially the extra shoots you generated with the pinching technique from Trick 5, gently guide them outward in a fan shape across the width of the support rather than letting them all funnel straight up the middle. Use soft plant ties or loose loops of garden twine, never anything that cinches tight, and re-angle the ties every week or two as the shoots lengthen. What this does is force even coverage. Instead of one crowded column of growth with 2 bare edges, you get a vine that fills the entire width of an arbor obelisk or fence panel evenly, because you deliberately spread its energy sideways before it had the chance to commit itself to a single upward line. This is especially worth the effort with vigorous climbers meant to cover large structures like Etoile Violette, a small flowered Viticella type in rich violet-purple zones 4 through 9, and Bill Mackenzie with bright yellow, lantern-shaped blooms, also zones 4 through 9. Both are strong enough to cover an entire pergola, but only if you have given them a wide path to spread across instead of one narrow lane straight up. Fan training gives the plant direction, but direction alone does not build a plant strong enough to actually fill that space. For that, we need to go back to something you do with your hands in the soil right at the very beginning. Trick 3: Bone meal at planting for root development. I want to be clear about something, because this trick gets confused with a completely different one people have heard elsewhere. This is not about feeding a mature plant to push more blooms. This is about what you feed the plant on day 1. And it is specifically about phosphorus. Bone meal is naturally high in phosphorus, and phosphorus is the element most directly responsible for root development in a young plant. Nitrogen builds leaves and stems. Potassium supports flowering and overall vigor later on. But in those first critical weeks after planting, phosphorus is what drives the fine root hairs to multiply and spread through the surrounding soil. At planting time, work 2 to 3 tablespoons of bone meal into the bottom of the planting hole and mix it lightly with the surrounding soil before you set the root ball in. Never let it sit in direct contact with bare roots. Mix it through and the backfill instead. That single application done correctly at planting gives the root system a running start that pays off for the entire life of the plant, because everything else, the height, the flower count, the vigor, is downstream of how well the roots established in those first few months. This matters most for the plants you are asking to become large, established specimens quickly, like Duchess of Edinburgh, a fully double white, large-flowered variety zones 4 through 9, which needs a substantial root system to support the energy cost of producing those dense, layered blooms. A strong root system needs one more thing to actually use all that phosphorus and all that expanded fungal network we talked about earlier, and it is not more water. It is the opposite of what most people assume. Trick 2: deep, infrequent drip watering. Here is the instinct almost every new gardener has: the plant is young, it just went into the ground, so water it a little often just to be safe. That instinct is quietly working against you. That frequent shallow watering keeps moisture sitting in the top few inches of soil, and roots, like most living things, take the path of least resistance. If water is always available near the surface, the root system has no reason to grow downward, and you end up with a shallow, weak root network that struggles the moment there is a hot, dry week or strong wind pulling at the vine. The correct approach is deep, infrequent watering, ideally through a drip line or soaker hose placed at the base of the plant. Water thoroughly until moisture has genuinely penetrated several inches down, and then let the top inch or two of soil dry out before you water again. In the first 2 growing seasons especially, this trains the roots to chase moisture downward, building exactly the kind of deep, resilient root system that supports fast top growth later and shrugs off short dry spells without stress. This is particularly important for varieties planted in warmer zones with intense summer heat, like Princess Diana, a deep, rosy pink, tulip-shaped bloomer zones 5 through 9, which performs dramatically better with deep roots pulling moisture from below than with a shallow system, constantly chasing surface watering. Every trick so far has been about what you do after the plant is already in the ground. But there is one decision that happens before any of that, and it quietly determines how much of an advantage every other trick on this list is actually going to give you. Trick 1. Planting in autumn, not spring. This is the foundation. Every other trick on this list works better, faster, and more reliably if you get this one decision right, and almost everyone gets it wrong, simply because spring is when garden centers are full of blooming clematis in pots, tempting you to buy and plant right then. Here is the problem with spring planting. A clematis planted in spring has to do 2 demanding things at once: build a brand new root system and perform pushing out growth and flowers, all during the exact weeks when summer heat is arriving. It is being asked to establish and perform simultaneously, and something has to give. Usually it is root development. Plant in autumn instead, while the soil is still warm from summer but the air is cooling and the plant's above-ground demands are winding down. With nothing urgent to do above ground, the plant redirects nearly all of its energy into root establishment through the remaining weeks of warm soil right up until the ground finally goes cold. By the time spring arrives, that root system is already ahead of where a spring-planted vine would be at the same point, which means every technique we just covered, the pH correction, the mycorrhizal fungi, the pinching, the fan training, the bone meal, the deep watering, all of it has a stronger foundation to work from. This is the single decision that stacks the odds in your favor before you have done anything else. For cold winter zones, look for reliably hardy varieties suited to autumn planting like Jackmanii and Henryi, both zones 4 through 9, which establish well through a mild autumn and winter with light mulch protection over the crown. In milder zones, 7 through 9 autumn planting works for nearly the entire clematis range, since winter cold is rarely severe enough to threaten a newly settled root system. Get this one right, and you are not fighting against the calendar for the rest of the plant's life. You are working with it. Let's bring it together. Correct the soil chemistry so the roots can actually use what is there. Inoculate with mycorrhizal fungi so those roots reach further than they ever could alone. Pinch the lead shoot early to force the plant to branch instead of climbing thin and bare. Fan train that new growth so it fills the space instead of crowding into one narrow column. Feed phosphorus at planting to build the root system that everything else depends on. Water deep and infrequently to pull those roots downward instead of keeping them shallow. And plant in autumn so every one of those techniques has the strongest possible foundation to build on from day one. 7 tricks. 1 system. And that 2.5 times growth rate is not one single hack. It is what happens when all 7 of these work together, compounding on each other instead of fighting against a plant that was never given the right start. Now I know a lot of you watching this already have a clematis in the ground, one that has been sitting there for years, thin, sparse, not doing much of anything. Everything in today's video is built for a plant going into the ground for the first time. Reviving an established vine that is stuck is a completely different problem with a completely different set of techniques, and that is exactly what next week's video is going to cover. If that sounds like your yard, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. Before you do anything else, here are 3 steps to take right now. Step 1. Test your soil pH, or simply plan to work a light dusting of garden lime into the planting area this spring if you are in a region with naturally acidic soil. Step 2. Pick up a bag of mycorrhizal inoculant and a small bag of bone meal before your next trip to plant anything. Both are inexpensive and both need to go in the hole at planting time, not after. Step 3. If you are planting a new clematis this year, mark your calendar for autumn planting instead of spring and start scouting your site and support structure now so you are ready when the season turns. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, I want to understand why. This is free, it comes out every single week, and it is built entirely around giving real American gardeners the specific, honest information the industry has no reason to hand you for nothing. No sponsored plants, no paid recommendations, just what actually works. Subscribe now and send this video to one person in your life whose clematis has been sitting there barely growing for years. This is the video that finally explains why.